This is the Public Square. I'm Alan C. Duncan in studio with Dave Zanotti, and today we've got a treat for you. An update about the growing library at the American Mission Center, and after that, a lecture given earlier this summer by our dear friend, Dr. W.B. Allen. Dave, I'm excited for our friends to hear this broadcast.
You got to go on another field trip.
Yes, yes.
We talked about it. We haven't really gotten all the data back, but you brought back more than we were bargaining for. The field trip was to go over to visit with Dr. Allen, William B. Allen, who's one of our beloved trustees at the American Policy Roundtable in the Public Square. Now, if you don't know Dr. Allen, you're in for a treat, because getting to know Dr. Allen is very special. I can guarantee you it will be a gift that comes to you from this broadcast and this ministry you will not regret. We have had more people spend more time telling us how they just want to hear more from Dr. Allen on this broadcast, and they should, because he is really, I think, the leading political philosopher in America today. He's one of the most experienced men in the realm of philosophy and political science and public policy. He's one of America's most esteemed collegiate educators as a professor. He's been a dean at Michigan State University. His credentials are, he's taught everywhere. He's taught at Princeton. He's taught at Ashland. He's taught at University of Colorado. I can't even remember all the different schools. It's you know, all that. He's a great friend. And he's a mentor to this organization. And so a while back, after our many exploits, and particularly through the George Washington Project and Mount Vernon and all the things that we did there for several years, he surprised us with a suggestion, and that is that as he's nearing the latter stages of his educational career, he's concerned about the ultimate resting place of his personal library, the disposition of that library, which is quite large. And so we discovered that a good portion of that library he had decided to donate to the American Policy Roundtable to be placed at the American Mission Center, because he told me I can think of no better place for this to be. And we were overwhelmed. Everything about the American Mission Center has been overwhelming to us. From when we first received the land grant of the 5 acres to build the campus, and then to the gifts that came in to enable us to build the first building on the property and to put in all the amenities and utilities necessary for the second and third building that are going to go on this campus, to the day we broke ground on the 4th of July, and in 2019, what a day that was. And we had all the kids of all the staff members had all the shovels, little tiny shovels, baby shovels, big shovels.
Yeah. And
they turned the ground over. Your boys were here. They were a part of that.
They were. There's a great photo of that. It's a great photo. I might still have one of those shovels in my garage somewhere.
Isn't that it's a wonderful photo, because this has always been for the next generation, for the next generation. And then the day that the place was dedicated with the closing passages from the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, and the prayer box that went forward, the prayer chest where people put prayers that we said will open 20 years from now. The prayers on the day of the opening of the American Mission Center. What a place this is. What a wonderful testimony to the faithfulness of the people of God who want the truth to be well represented in the light of liberty to continue in America. So when Dr. Allen added his library, it's just like, wow, this story just keeps getting better and better. So somebody had to go, and it was amazing. You're like Gomer Pyle, man. You just jumped to the volunteer right there. Nobody could jump in on you.
I said, I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take that.
You took it. And then your dad found out you were going, so he decided to ride along with you. And the two of you had a wonderful time and experience, but then you picked up a bonus.
We did. Well, the last time we were talking about this, we were about to go. And so the books were not yet in-house. We had to still go get them. Now we can tell listeners the Dr. William B. Allen Library is safely on the premises of the American Mission Center. So I feel a lot better. It's above our heads right now.
And part of it's on the shelves already.
Part of it's on the shelves. A lot of it's still in boxes because, as you said, it's a very vast library, thousands of volumes. But I had an opportunity to go through some of them and put some of them on the shelves. There's some great stuff. I think it's everything Washington ever wrote in his entire life is on the shelf now.
He gave us the entire 39 volumes
Yes.
of Washington's writings that he worked through, along with his work at the Library of Congress and other places, to create the work that he did on George Washington that's sold to this day as the definitive work at Mount Vernon on the writings of George Washington. He gave us his original research library on that project. I saw it. I got emotional just looking at it.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. So we came back with the library, but we also came back with a talk that Dr. Allen invited us to as well. He was giving an address to teachers from Brigham Young University.
Never not working.
Yeah, he booked 2 events on the same day. I'm gonna donate my library, and I'm gonna talk to the next generation of young students as well. Same day. So he invited us to
Were
tag
these
along.
teachers he was talking to?
They were. I think they were going to school to be teachers.
Okay,
they were educators. Yes.
Okay.
It was interesting. It was primarily young women. I didn't expect it. He said that that's common now. He said it's very common when he speaks in these types of settings. It's primarily young women, and they loved him. They just fell in love with him by the end. By Dr. Allen, like you could just tell. They absolutely were enthralled by everything that he had to say.
Then, being the consummate producer that you are, you opened up some recording device you just happened to have with you.
Well, funny story. Funny you should mention that. So I took down there a recorder, a Zoom recorder that we've used many times. Wayne Shepard recommended it to me years ago. We've used it to record many things, many remote interviews people have heard on the public square from us. I get there to the event, and I try to turn it on, and it's dead. And I open up the back, and the batteries had done that thing where you've left batteries in something too long, and they've exploded.
Oh, no.
And so I'm panicking. I'm like, well, this is the remote device that I bring to all these things, and it's done. And we're about to go live. It's about to start. So I'm panicking. I'm like, I'm going to miss Dr. Allen speaking to all these people. I'm going to miss the opportunity. So I told my dad, I said, Dad, just open up your iPhone, just put it on the table and just roll on it. So the broadcast we're going to bring you today is recorded by Rick Duncan's iPhone, very professionally.
Our appreciation to Steve Jobs, the original designer,
Yes.
and to Apple.
Yes. So now it's been clean. We've cleaned it a little bit. We've used some production magic on the back end, but yeah, that's what it was. Was doing some video with mine.
So this is how Dr. Allen teaches teachers.
Yeah.
It's a conversation. What basically is his subject?
His subject is the founding. His subject is a lot of Washington, reading direct quotes from Washington. His subject is about citizenship, how we are to be as citizens in this nation that we have.
Well, a lot of times when we have Dr. Allen on the air, people say, gee, I wish I could ask him some questions. This is really a significant Q&A period, because now when Dr. Allen lectures, he almost always says a little and then stops and says, tell me what you think.
Yes.
I've watched him do this. And he really is, this is really his heart, is to find out what's on their minds. So this is kind of, probably our listeners have got some of the very same questions they've had. So if you're brand new, yes, the man with the voice, that's always how he's identified. The man with that voice, that's Dr. William B. Allen. And you're going to hear him teaching teachers about the founding and answering their questions as well. We thought it was an appropriate broadcast because we are around that 4th of July time frame. And teaching America to the next generation is such a critical part of Dr. Allen's vision for the next generation, for America. And it's so much a part of our vision as well. So I don't think we can ever do too much of this. Now, I'll also tell you that there's lots of other resources at thepublicsquare.com where you can listen to other programs that Dr. Allen's done throughout the year. You can even listen to one of the best Christmas in Americas I think we've ever done, which was 1783, the year that George Washington came home from the field for Christmas.
Yes, that's a great one. And now, before we listen to this address, I want to mention that you hear some room sound and some reverb as you're listening to this. I think it's important for listeners to get the scene, have the setting in place. This took place in what's now a wedding venue, kind of an event center space, but it's a historic converted bank that was built in 1883. So it's got this limestone face. You enter in to see vaulted ceilings, chandeliers, beautiful hardwood floors, and Dr. Allen's just standing up there, and he's addressing the students. So it's a beautiful setting. Look out certain windows, you see a view of the Chesapeake, and it's just a a gorgeous place.
Let's take the time now to go via the iPhone into a meeting where Dr. William B. Allen is teaching teachers.
So happy you got to come to my hometown. Glad that you got out of the densely packed city long enough to remember that there are pockets and corners of this wonderful land of ours where the life carries on, as in some degree it was first envisioned, but which I will begin by simply underscoring something of importance. And I think we talked about this the last time I was there on the campus at the Wheatley Institute last November, namely that the entire project of life in these United States engages each and every one of us, not merely as beneficiaries. Have you inquired to see whose will you're listed in as beneficiary? Everybody wants to be a beneficiary. But we're engaged not just as beneficiaries, but as responsibles. We are the decision makers, you no less than I, and we often fall into the pattern of imagining that somebody else is making the decisions. People speak about people in office as if they were the last word, the ne plus ultra, that everything depends on them, and that what happens to us happens because they decide it. We almost think we're victims. But the reality is, we citizens are in charge. We are the government.
You're listening to a lecture given by Dr. W.B. Allen on today's edition of The Public Square. We've got to take a quick break right now, but we'll be back with more of this address in just a moment. Please stay with us.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Welcome back to this special edition of The Public Square, featuring an address given by our friend Dr. W.B. Allen.
We are the government. Now, does that sound like a platitude? She said yes. It should. It should. But it is not a platitude. You will think it a platitude if you think it's only a way to try to pacify your expectations in the political realm. But that is not the point of the observation. The point is this political system, this constitution, this regime, this society only works to the extent that the citizens actually are in charge. And if they cease to be so, it will fail. Easy enough for me to say I won't be around to see it in all likelihood. But you will. You will still be here when that moment comes. And that is why it is so important for you to be prepared to fulfill your responsibility. And it's not enough just to make choices in an election, this or that candidate, this or that political party. You must also have firm convictions about right and wrong, good and evil, just and unjust. The idea of self-government as you know from George Washington, is every self needs governing. It is not majority rule, as we sometimes speak of it, but it is the expectation of moral capacity in each and every one of us. And what do we mean by moral capacity? We mean the capacity to govern ourselves, to make decisions on the basis of reason and not passion, to follow principles of morality, not mere appetites, to reject the fallacious notion that truth is merely subjective and every person can have his or her own truth. There is no your truth, my truth. There is only truth. And self-government means to be responsible to the truth. So I'm going to share with you a passage from George Washington, which he wrote in 1783, and which sums up the entire story. And after I've read that, then we're going to have a conversation. But let me first give you the context in which he makes this statement. The war is over. The Revolutionary War, that is. The peace treaty has been agreed. The war ended literally in 1781, but it took nearly 2 full years before the Treaty of Paris could be agreed and settled, at which point the war was finally over. The United States was free and independent and recognized so by Great Britain. The commander of the forces in the United States at that moment thought it appropriate to communicate his ideas about the political situation of the country to the entire country. Imagine, for example, that the person who decided to speak to the country today about the country's political state were the Secretary of Defense or the Army Chief of Staff. That would be equivalent. We would not tolerate it. We would think that's completely out of step. Nevertheless, this general, who was more than a general, who was effectively the only government the country had for a time during the Revolutionary War, decided that besides being a general, he needed to share political advice. And so he wrote an address which he called a circular letter to the governors and the people of the 13 states. He also referred to it as his political legacy, by which he meant something like a last will and testament, politically speaking. It was his first real retirement. He had several retirements before he ended his life, each of which served to raise him to higher levels. But this is what he said in that address. In a paean to justice, Washington tied man's justice to God's will. When he resigned his army command in 1783, he had already made it clear that he aimed to continue the effort to found a unified nation that could secure its national character into a remote futurity. In phrasing his final prayer for his countrymen from Micah, so amended as to embrace the most extensive human ambition, Washington projected the goal he aimed at. This is the goal. This is what he said: that God would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all, to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our religion, our blessed religion. And without an humble imitation of whose example in these things, we can never hope to be a happy nation. Let those words sink in. We can never hope to be a happy nation if we do not imitate the divine author of our blessed religion, and if we do not respond as the prophet in Micah 6:8 responded to the question, what does God ask of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. But notice that Washington modified the last clause. He said that we would act, not just walking humbly with our God, but with charity, humility, and a pacific temper of mind in imitation of Christ. Now, that entire passage describes what Washington means when he says we must develop a national character. It means that we must develop character, which will become national when we all have developed characters of such fashion. So, self-government means good character. Self-government is not possible for people without good character. Washington affirmed that in his first inaugural and in his 1796 farewell address, where in 1796 he also said the idea that you could have virtue without religion is a fallacy. What does it all mean? It means mere processes, institutions, majority rule, court decisions are not enough. And whoever tries to convince you that our democracy can be saved simply by shoring up processes and institutions fails. We are free because we enjoy the freedom that the freedom of conscience gives us. The freedom of conscience, better defined as James Madison did in 1784, as the obligations human beings owe to God, which are prior to any obligations they owe to society. Are you seeing a pattern? Good and decent people can be free and democratic people. People who are not good and decent can never be truly free or democratic. We learned this lesson from George Washington and from the founding itself. And in learning it, discover what is the challenge and responsibility that we face. So you're about to take on an awesome responsibility to convey precisely what I have just described to the tender minds not yet formed, waiting to be directed in the proper path. How are you going to undertake that work? Where will you begin? What's the starting point?
We've got to take a quick break, but we'll be back for more of this address given by Dr. W.B. Allen earlier this summer when we come back on the Public Square. Stay with us.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Let's head back inside the room and listen in as Dr. W.B. Allen addresses a room of students and educators earlier this summer.
So you're about to take on an awesome responsibility to convey precisely what I have just described to the tender minds not yet formed, waiting to be directed in the proper path. How are you going to undertake that work? Where will you begin? What's the starting point? Anyone, feel free to speak. Yes.
I think you start by living it.
In order to do it, you must do it. Performance. That's an elegant standard. Where else? And who else? Mm-hmm.
I think also like setting an expectation for behavior.
Expecting behavior, not excusing behavior. Another good suggestion. Setting a high standard. You know, I've often said to people, the simplest things in life will make all of these procedures clear to us if you remember just to reflect upon them. And so that if we take what we ask of athletes into consideration, and we're never satisfied until we reach the limit. High expectations. That is what produces athletic excellence. That is also what produces moral excellence. Being silent about moral expectations will never lead to moral excellence. But that's not easy because we live in a world in which, let's face it, we understand render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. People are going to say, you can't talk about this or that in the classroom. You can't have expectations of students in the classroom. That's not your role to assign. What is your role then, if not that? What is your role going to be if it is not to lead students forth towards excellence? I'll change the question because I don't want you to think it's a merely personal and subjective question. I'm going to ask you the question the way I posed it to a group in seminar last night, which we did virtually. How far do you count as a citizen? Do you count? And if so, how much do you count? How would you answer that question? I've asked a tougher question now, haven't I? Do you count? When I ask you, do you count, I'm asking you, in addition to the question of whether other people ought to take notice of you, I'm asking whether you are taking responsibility for the outcomes in this society. Do you count as a decision maker? Do you count as being in charge? And the reason I ask that question is because it is intimately connected with the expectation of self-government that we're talking about. It is, you might say, the responsibility side of self-government. You should govern yourselves. In governing yourselves, you should recognize that you're responsible for the decisions that affect the government of others as well. Your decisions and your opinions should count. That's what makes you a citizen. The fact that you count. And that you expect to count. And not to be dismissed. Not to be categorized, stereotyped, or belittled. And certainly not to be subordinated to any supposed higher secular authority. Now that's tougher, isn't it? Because you're going to have, just to start at the very bottom, school principals, superintendents, mayors, representatives, legislators, governors, federal executives, and countless million bureaucrats, every single one of whom will imagine that he or she should have greater authority than you. And when I tell you that and ask you, do you count? How will you respond in the face of all that? Can you still count in the face of all of that mountain of authority?
Yeah, so as soon as you asked that first question, I went and pulled up a picture I took on our first day in group together, a book that was shared in our class from Margaret Mead, which is never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, and you can see only thing that ever has. Yes, we have like the layers of bureaucracy, but each person still has a direct line to government.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, you do have a direct line, but remember the line runs in both directions. It always points back at you, as well as out towards whatever other object you have in mind. And that's the measure of responsibility that we're talking about. Now, I don't know if you've done this search of the meaning of the word citizen, the origin of the term citizens, the whole etymology of the term citizen, or the cultural context of the term citizen. But there's a shortcut, too. All you have to do is ask yourself, what is it that it's not to be a citizen? It is not to be of this or that tribe. It is not to be of this or that religion. It is not to be of this or that race. It is not to be of this or that historical background. To be a citizen is straightforwardly and simply to be willingly present in a society organized on the basis of the consent of the governed. That's what it means to be a citizen. What it means to be a citizen is to count. Now, when you hear that, you must hear something that's very important, historically speaking. You must hear that that is a revolutionary departure from what the world had always experienced prior to 1776. That was never true anywhere else in the world until 1776. Before that, people were not really citizens anywhere. They were subjects. Subjects of tyrants, despots, monarchs, or whatever. But not citizens. Why? Because citizens are responsible for their communities. They make them be and sustain them. They consent. The first operation of self-government is the operation of consent. This then is what George Washington is talking about, and he goes into it great length. And one of the things you want to bear in mind, and I'm going to close with this and then take questions, is that America has a story often misrepresented, but a story which must be represented properly in order fully to appreciate the meaning of citizenship. I've illustrated that story in a recent essay which has been shared with you, where I quote as the epigraph at the beginning of the essay, Shakespeare's Tempest, which represents Stefano. Stefano is a crude, rude, irreverent, outspoken character. And I suggest in this essay that he's the example of the true and perfect American. Now, you've read the essay, so you understand how this develops in the course of the essay. But the point is this. Stefano, or Stephen Hopkins, as he was in Jamestown and at Plymouth, was an ordinary soul, not extraordinary, not an aristocrat, not separated by class or anything else. He was simply someone who had enough self-confidence to speak up for himself, to speak out when he saw wrong, and to insist on his own judgment. Not to insist obnoxiously. When he was fined by the general court, he paid his fines. He went through the legal processes. He submitted to the rule of law. But he did not surrender his independent authority and responsibility to judge. He was, as I put it in the essay, the original abolitionist. And it is his spirit that infuses the entire American experience, which leads to the abolitionism in the Declaration of Independence. And by that, I mean not simply the abolition of slavery, but I mean the abolitionism of all those radical distinctions about the authority to rule that are overturned by the idea of the consent of the governed. They alone are free who freely consent to the government to which they are subject. That's the spirit of abolition. That's the story of America. And that story is best illustrated by ordinary Americans, not by people of special privilege.
We've got to take a break now, but we'll be back with more of this lecture from Dr. W.B. Allen when we return on the Public Square. You are listening to The Public Square and a special lecture given by our friend Dr. W.B. Allen from his hometown of Havre de Grace, Maryland. Let's listen back in as he answers a student's question about what good character looks like in a citizen.
There are some cardinal virtues. Start with justice. Add to justice fortitude. Add to fortitude industry. And take those three and leaven them with a powerful dose of moderation. You do that, and you will have perfected the moral capacity in any young person. I do not exclude other human excellences by listing those four. I list those four as the cardinal of the foundation upon which all the rest can be built.
Can you say more about fortitude? That's a word we don't use as often as folks used to.
Yes, I use fortitude rather than courage because we tend to associate courage only with the attitude towards fear of pain. Fortitude is broader. You need fortitude to confront pain or suffering. You need that resource to stand out against the threat. But you also need fortitude in a different way, which has nothing to do with the fear of pain. And that is the persistence in pursuing a worthy objective. That requires fortitude. The ability to commit oneself unflinchingly to a course of conduct which one expects to be rewarded with the rewards due to virtue. That's fortitude. You need hard work, and therefore I add industriousness. But you aren't going to perform hard work unless you already have the attitude of what they used to call, if they don't use fortitude anymore, stick-to-itiveness.
In your life, what has helped you really come to appreciate our story, and what would you advise us to do to help students really appreciate our story?
It's an excellent question. I've come across many things in the course of my life that have been shaping in the sense of your question, and probably none more profoundly than the influence of my mother, who was my source of inspiration and direction. But I also was able to be influenced by other heroes. My cousin Emma, who went off in the first decade of the 20th century, a missionary to Africa, was always a hero to me. She gave her life building institutions in Africa, contracting tropical diseases from which she perished at too early an age. But it was having the example of such things that conveyed to me what it was possible to do in the world, and especially what it would mean to give of oneself. And when we talk about self-government, responsibility, and personal accountability, we sometimes fall into the mistaken understanding that it's about us. Well, it's not about us. When we talk about justice, for example, we're talking about preferring the good of others. That's what justice means. That's the definition of justice. Self-government means, of course, subjecting ourselves to purposes higher than ourselves. And I would say the thing that most shaped me early in my life was the coming to the realization that there were things more important than little old me. For you as educators, read, read, read. Never stop reading. Secondly, for your students, introduce them to primary source materials. Above all else, if you want to deflect from fads, contemporary distortions, keep them reading primary source materials. People will pretend that they can't understand this. It's written in archaic language, this or that. That's all false. They will understand it and love it, I assure you. If you just take something like George Washington's Little Rules of Civility and give it to young children as young as 12 years of age or even younger, you will discover they will have a ball. They will love it. And why? They will have an intuitive response to it. It won't require explanation or analysis for them. They will relate to it. And when they can begin relating to such things as that, then they begin to build the architecture of understanding, which enables them to read other materials and to form concrete ideas about their implications, and gives them a sense of independent judgment rather than dependence upon conventional opinion. Yes.
How important do you think the family is in relation to building citizens of the United States?
I think the family is the foundation of human society, all human society. Without the family, there's no reason for the existence of society. So it's critical. In the United States, it is particularly important to acknowledge the priority of the family because we say we are self-governing individuals, but we don't spring into that role immediately. We, of course, are born as helpless and thoughtless. That's our natural situation. What brings us forward from that moment to the point of some capacity? But family. That is the foundation. No matter how early you're going to start your education, you will never start it early enough to cut off the critical influence of family, that superstructure that begins to point each soul towards its responsible future. And besides, it is only through the family from the earliest age that you're going to be able to convey religious faith. People don't often think about this. They say, well, there are other ways to teach children besides the family. Perhaps you can teach them certain things, maybe the alphabet, the rudiments of arithmetic, but you're not going to convey religious faith apart from the family. And there's nothing more importantly to be conveyed than religious faith.
I hate to do it, but I've got to jump in here. We've got to get to a break. I know some stations may have to cut away right now. If your station does, you can hear the conclusion of this broadcast at thepublicsquare.com or on the free Public Square mobile app. Just look for the lamppost in your app store. You can also find the Public Square on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and even now, you can find the audio on YouTube as well. Anybody's free to go check it out there if you'd like to listen again. And on most of these stations, we'll be right back after this short break. sticking with the Public Square all this time, our final few minutes together. Let's return back to the lecture hall and continue listening to Dr. W.B. Allen as he responds to a question about ordered liberty.
Ordered liberty is conveyed very succinctly by James Wilson, one of the members of the Constitutional Convention of 1787 and of the first Supreme Court of the United States, who in his law lectures describes the fundamental conditions of what you're referring to as ordered liberty. And the one and most succinct account he gives is that in which he says is the equal and impartial administration of the laws is what constitutes ordered liberty. So from liberty, we generate the institutions of government. That's what the power of consent gives to us. But they have to function. How must they function? With an equal and impartial administration of the laws. That's what makes it ordered liberty. There's really no other condition for that besides that. Yes, our liberty exists under moral constraints, but its being an ordered liberty is entirely dependent upon the constraint on the power of government and the equal and impartial administration of that government.
And part of the reason why I asked is because you talked about the mountain of authority that can be placed over you. How do you see yourself as functioning within that mountain of authority, but yet not giving up that individual judgment that you say is key?
Well, the apostle says we have a liberty in Christ. At the same time, he says to us, obey the authorities. And I think that what he is intending us to understand by that is that we participate in civil society on grounds that must be respectful, but we do so without abandoning our obligations to God. But secondly, we knowingly participate in that relationship, i.e., we take the responsibility to participate upon our own shoulders. This comes out nowhere so clearly as when the apostle talks about what slaves ought to do in reference to masters and masters with reference to slaves. He doesn't say slavery is an improved condition. He says it is an existing condition. And that even when one finds oneself in that posture, one still must remember to act like a Christian. That's what the advice is. Well, I think the same thing is true with regard to the question that you're raising. We will have, let's call them political authorities, asserting various degrees of regulatory power to which we must defer, but not defer to the point of refusing to question where questioning is appropriate. So you can both, as the letter from a Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King outlines it, you can both submit to the law that you know to be unjust and resist the injustice of the law. You do both, not one or the other.
If you could only tell one story about George Washington, what's your favorite, what one story?
It is really very difficult for me to fasten on only one. But in this context, I'm going to remember another vignette, which I think says more about him in a certain way than anything else does. George Washington placed a lot of confidence in those cabinet members and others who worked with him. And he held them to very high standards. He held them to the standard of candor, and he expected them to be completely honest with him. And so there arose in 1792 a controversy that divided Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. And the two of them were forming the new political parties that were going to become the permanent feature of American life thereafter. And they were quite literally at one another's throats. And these are both members of the cabinet working at cross purposes, and it led to such things as covert, anonymous attacks on the president himself, as well as attacks on Alexander Hamilton and accusations of bad dealing. But at one point in the summer of '92, this is a period of July to August, George Washington takes a brief vacation, goes to Mount Vernon, Then he comes back to the Capitol, and he writes a letter to his Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, which is a very long letter with a long list of complaints about the government. And Washington says in this letter, while I was on my trip, I came across this one correspondent who raised a series of questions, and I'm asking you to reply to these questions. And that's pretty much all he said in the letter. He didn't identify who the correspondent was. Alexander Hamilton takes about 2 weeks, not much longer than that. He was an extremely productive individual. Sends him back a 40-page letter of response, which begins with the statement, yes, Mr. Jefferson has said these things, but... now, that vignette conveys several things. One, Washington avoided staging the confrontation. He didn't want to say, Jefferson says this, what do you say? So he made it as harmless as he possibly could, but still asked for direct response. Two, he wanted to have actual answers. He didn't want to just pass this off as chaff. He says, let's talk about these things, let's work through them. Three, they were working in an environment in which no one could hide anything from anybody. And so Hamilton knew immediately where it came from, responded point by point to the entire list of objections, to Washington's entire satisfaction. And so as you work your way through the process, you see how he operates and how he judges in the end. And this is repeated in many instances throughout the course of his career. But I like that one especially because it shows that he had a real sense of who these people were that he was leading, and we began to understand how he led them, how he got them to do what he needed them to do, even when they didn't wish to do it.
That's Dr. W.B. Allen speaking earlier this summer at a lecture in his hometown of Havre de Grace, Maryland.
It's not often that I get the opportunity on air to say thank you, Alan C. Duncan. Thank you, Rick Duncan, for taking the trip to go over there to get those books, to make sure that the company that we had hired to secure this library with all the protections necessary, because there are some very old volumes in this library for which we're very, very grateful to hold those treasures. But thank you for going. And I just kind of feel like the Lord just gave you a little extra blessing. Yeah. Because you got to sit in on this session.
Oh, it was a blessing. It's interesting. My dad and I talked probably several hours on driving back home, talked about his remarks, talked about the four virtues that he spoke about. Dr. Allen phrases things and says things in a certain way that you want to learn more.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the signs of the greatest kind of teachers.
Well, he defines the concept of artful in the realm of speech.
Yeah.
But I guess when you're at that level of a lifetime of endless discovery, of endless documents, of endless historical figures in life, in original languages, in multiple languages, I'm guessing there's so much in there that it just sort of lets some of it out when people are asking you.
I'm sure it's not easy, but he does make it look easy.
Yeah, he does. And that the great ones all do, don't they?
They do, yeah.
So, well, thank you for taking the time to do that. And thank you most of all to everyone who supports us. And I know Dr. Allen would send his thanks as well, that we are able to have these kinds of conversations, that we have the time and the ability and the resources to produce them and break that bread out and share it to the world in regards to the true nature of America, in the hope that as we keep speaking to the next generation, we can return to some of those true truth moments that I think Dr. Allen is living for today and sharing with the next generation.
Agreed. Well, thanks, Dave. Our thanks to Dr. W.B. Allen, and thanks to you for listening to this edition of The Public Square, this special edition of The Public Square. If you'd like to listen again, feel free to find us at thepublicsquare.com, our free mobile app, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now even YouTube. You can hear the audio as well if you'd like to listen again and share with a friend. We appreciate you being with us, and we'll see you next time for another edition of The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.